Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask Lovecraft After Dark. Tonight, we are joined by a delightful author, a friend, someone I got a chance to spend a little bit of time at the HP Lovecraft Film Festival in San Pedro. I would like to welcome SP Miskowski to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
Yes, indeed.
Face to face, so to speak.
This is I consider this something of a make-do interview because we met, as I said, in San Pedro for the film festival, which was a lot of fun. And part of my duties at that festival was to interview people. They were doing these live streams, and so they would just sort of plonk me down in front of folks and give me, they give me about 5 minutes to know who I was talking to. And I got to interview really fun people. I interviewed Hughes. I interviewed Mike Griffin. It was an absolute delight.
That was a good festival. That was fun. It was a nice time.
Yeah, that was a real good time. The problem was all of that streaming stuff was only preserved for like 30 days or something like that. It was really just meant for the live stream audience.
Oh, okay.
So all of that went away. Like, all the strange vamping I did between movies, because they would haul me out between their films to be like, well, you just watched The Color Out of Space from 1975, and I was hoping like I could save that for my reel.
It's like theater. It's gone.
That's right. I should be able to appreciate the impermanence of such things. But the nice thing is that now I have the opportunity to go back, track down all those folks I interviewed before and relive the magic. And a lot's happened. You've published a great deal. I think since then, that was I think the early 2017. And you've had now several stories published in different collections and anthologies, and 2 novels, or you're about to have your second novel since then come out. Tell us what.
I have my 3rd novel, a very short novel, but it's my 3rd novel coming out in February. It'll be February 22nd. And the previous ones were Knock Knock and I Wish I Was Like You.
This one that's coming out February is The Worst Is Yet to Come. You were very kind and sent me a copy of that to do a preview for, and it broke me a little. I'm not going to lie. I was not sure what to expect, and I was walloped by it.
There
was some harsh stuff in there. As I don't want to give too much away, but there's a lot of family stuff. There's a lot of kids stuff.
A lot of kids stuff.
And when you're a parent, I discovered, I got into the horror game. I was always a big fan of horror as in high school and read a lot and watched a lot. And then as soon as I became a parent, suddenly horror I could enjoy more relaxedly before I was a parent was a lot harder to watch or to absorb. After suddenly the viscerality of having to be responsible for another human life comes into play. And given the family nature of this book, there's much peril, I believe. I think that's the euphemism that gets used in these situations.
Danger at every turn. Yeah.
Is exploring the kind of family dynamic something you've done in all your works, or is this new for you?
Well, I certainly did it in Knock Knock and in the subsequent novellas that were related to Knock Knock. There were 3 novellas, and all of them sort of played around with some of the same themes. Some of them had overlapping characters. One of the books was a prequel to Knock Knock. Another one picked up during the 3rd section of Knock Knock at the very end of the book, and the action in that novella, which was Astoria, was concurrent with the last section of Knock Knock. There's a character in Knock Knock who gives up, who just I won't say which one, but she decides to just get out of town. She just gets in a car and leaves. And so for the rest of Knock Knock, we don't see her and we don't know what happened to her. Astoria is what happens. It picks up with her driving out of town, and then we find out what happened to her. And then there was a sequel which is called In the Light, and that was the third novella. So all of these had to do with some families in this town, this fictional town of Skilloot, Washington, which is along the southwest. It's the far southwest corner of Washington State, and so there were a lot of family themes and a lot of family issues and a lot of overlapping stories. It started, Knock Knock, the whole story started with three little girls deciding, after they had heard the horrors of another little girl's mom's pregnancy when they were in health class together, decided that they were never going to have children. They're only 11 years old, but they decided that's it. They're going to do whatever it takes to never have children. And one of the little girls is being raised by her aunt, who is a little bit strange. She has a spell book. She is a midwife. She has a lot of knowledge of sort of herbal medicines and all sorts of history of this place. And so the little girls get a spell. They steal a spell from her spell book, and they perform this ritual in the woods because they never want to have children. And then Knock Knock is about what happens to them over the next 50 years. What spins out of their attempt to cast a spell that will prevent them from ever having to be pregnant, ever having to have children. Even though at 11, they don't even know what that means. They're just terrified of it. So this book, The Worst Is Yet to Come, is a short novel about a family that has moved to Skilloot sometime after the events of Knock Knock, several years after Knock Knock and In the Light. And they don't know the local legends. They don't know any of the history of the town, and they don't care. They are a family from Seattle. They are upwardly mobile. They are living well. They can live very well outside of Seattle in a way that they couldn't live in the city anymore. And that's what they want. That's what they want for themselves and for their daughter. And so they move there and they settle there. And they kind of try to take in stride all of the oddities of living in a sort of rural, suburban area. They're not accustomed to the way of life there, but they try to fit in. They try to sort of connect with it, but they have no idea the specific things that have happened there a few years before.
See, that's really fascinating, because reading, I hadn't read Knock Knock. I just read The Worst Is Yet to Come. But I knew just based on reviews that you had used this town before and used this setting before. But what was fascinating for me was that while there was definitely a sense of place, the city, like there was this flavor and kind of texture to it, it didn't have that kind of like what I come to associate with, like, I'm going to sit down and make a town, and like the audience is going to meet the barber, and they're going to meet the mayor, and they're going to meet, like, people sort of have it all mapped out. Everyone felt very sort of like cramped and trapped in their own little bubbles within the confines. We see their really nice suburban house. We see the kind of the trailer park, the school, but it's not that really busy world building, which I for good or for bad, you tend to find when an author is like, okay, I'm going to actually create something from whole cloth. Was there a reason you wanted to have this sort of brand new city to play with, as opposed to just like, looking at some poor little burb on the map and saying, all right, I'm going to have a lot of horrors happen here?
Yeah, I wanted to combine some of the elements of places I actually know in Washington State. There are a few little towns around that area, and I've been there enough to get a real good sense of the people there. I'm related to some of the people there by marriage. I got the idea for Knock Knock from my husband's grandmother. We were visiting her, and I had a bad case of insomnia, and filled a notebook one night with just things that eventually became Knock Knock, after sitting up late with her, listening to her stories and listening to her complain about the neighbors down the road that would get drunk on beer and shoot off their guns just for no reason. And she was a very sharp, really smart lady, and she passed away before the book came out, and my mom passed away before the book came out. So I dedicated Knock Knock to both of them, because they both shared a lot of their stories with me, and those stories have continued to enrich the fiction that I've been working on over the last few years. But yeah, I wanted to take some of the elements of those little towns, but I wanted to get a real sense of people very much isolated from one another. Their lives are separated by things that they can't seem to conquer. And if you read the whole series of books, you'll see some of the reasons for that. You'll see why certain things break down and why certain things change. If there's a diner and there are other sites. There's the house with the bird houses, the broken bird houses, is actually the home of a woman who appears in, she is a character in The Light, but she was just mentioned in Knock Knock. And so there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of intersection in between the books. I hope that people can read them individually if they want to. I try to make complete stories, complete story with each book. But if you read more than one of them, you'll say, oh yeah, okay, and you'll recognize something, and it'll pick up in a different way at a different time period. And so I hope that that's fun for people. I hope that that's interesting and fun for people to make those connections. But I do hear what you're saying. It is a place where a lot of people who have been there for a long time just kind of don't get the people who are moving in now, but they understand why they're moving there, because you can get a lot more bang for your buck if you move way outside of Portland or Seattle these days to buy a house or to buy property. And that's very alluring. We were talking before about, what happens when you have children. One of the things that happens is you want to provide them with space to grow up in and to play and to thrive, and you want that place to be somewhere that they can walk home from school if they want to, and you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't have to be a terrible issue, and that's what these people are looking for when they move from Seattle. But they're looking for it for wrong reasons. Some of those are obvious from the beginning, and some of them sort of spell out throughout the book, and then some of them are only revealed late in the book. There are complex reasons why these people have come to this sort of isolated town. So there's also, I should mention, there's also I'll just throw it out there. There's a story in a Chaosium anthology that's coming out a little later on. It's edited by Nate Peterson, and I wrote a Skilloot story, the only Skilloot short story I've written for that Chaosium anthology. The book is called Sisterhood, and my story is called The Resurrected, and it's the backstory, the origin story for a doctor who appears in one of the novellas. And it's just a woman has gathered a series of documents, and she's reporting back to a friend that she gathered them for, and she was sending them to her. And you'll find out who that woman is if you read The Worst Is Yet to Come, or if you read In the Light, and then you read the Sisterhood story, The Resurrected. All the documents that this woman has gathered together will make sense.
Do you like that kind of corkboard and red string making connections between your stories? Like the kind of that puzzle making, and like, all right, so I mentioned this in this story, so it needs to crop up here, and like, oh, the timeline works out, so like this is happening at the time this is happening. Or does that drive you crazy, like trying to keep the index cards going?
I keep a lot of notebooks. I fill notebook after notebook, and I I diagram and I outline as I go along, but I don't feel like I have to stick to the outline. It's just, I will pause and I'll say, okay, where am I right now? Where are we with everything right now? And this relates back to this, and this relates to that. And I'll draw little diagrams for myself to keep myself going so that I don't lose track. And I've drawn maps of the place and, all sorts of things, but I don't feel like I have to be married to those things. I break those outlines as I go along because it all has to kind of happen organically or it's not really going to be a lot of fun. I love writing these. I've really enjoyed it. And as much as I've enjoyed it, it was really nice to step away for a while and write a novel that had nothing to do with Skaloot and nothing to do with sort of the folk horror background of that. And to just write an urban tale, which is what I Wish I Was Like You is about. It's set in the early 90s in Seattle. And it's a ghost story about a young woman who failed and failed and failed and failed. But I had to step away from it for a while, and I really didn't think I was going to write any more books that were related to Knock Knock. And then this just appeared out of nowhere. This just came to me. There were a couple of things that happened that family members told me about, and then there was something that happened in the news and national news, and then there was something that I'd read about a long time ago that all just kind of, it just really came together. And so I started working on it, and for a while it was really just a psychological thriller. And then I realized that I had to open it up to all of the elements of Skaloot. I had to open it up to, because these stories they're social, they're psychological, and they're supernatural, and all of those things sort of get woven together in each book. And I think you just have to go where, your creativity takes you, wherever your mind takes you. And so this book just occurred to me and I couldn't stop myself. I just decided. And I thought it would be a bigger book. It might be a longer book. Then I thought maybe it would be a novella. And then I just said, it is a short novel. It is what it is. It ends when it ends because it needs to end there. And I have the feeling that there will be at least one more book, but I'm not exactly sure what that will be. But I do now have a sense that there can be another book to it that connects with The Worst Is Yet to Come and then carries things forward a little bit.
Do you find you have to sort of keep all this kind of Skalootiness in your head, or like as you approach each story, or you're like, I'm writing this story and I'll just add like tack on this element and not worry about whether or not like this character is exactly the same? Like how sort of precise is your, a show Bible equivalent of as you're going to write these stories?
I feel like it might be a curse. Okay.
Well,
I feel like it's a curse. Some of the characters feel cursed and some of them are cursed, but I don't know. I don't know why. I love to read books that are like that. I love to read a book where I have to go, what? And flip back 30 pages, and check and make sure, yeah, that's okay. All right. And go forward again. I like I like putting the puzzle together and trying to guess what's going to happen next. I enjoy that as a reader. I like being challenged. I like being taken on a journey. I like, I like great ideas and great themes, but I really enjoy the kind of complex mystery. And so, yeah, I think I have a lot of it just in my head. There's a lot of it that I just can't get rid of. And so when these things occur again, then I think, well, okay, I'll build that in. But I do go back to the previous books if I'm not sure exactly how something ended up or what the tone was when a character completed their journey in another book. So I will go back and I'll check things, but a lot of it is in my head.
and do you have a sort of rigid set of like supernatural rules, like this is how this ghosts work and this is how this kind of stuff works, or like
Yes.
each book kind of like, you know what? There's going to be witches in this one, and this one there's going to be minotaurs. Like, like how does that kind of play out?
I took some liberties with this one. I did. I kind of stretched the limits of what was allowed in Skaloot, but I stuck to the rules with the things that had already been established. I didn't create a whole new way of doing things. I did stick to the rules. So there's just more in this book. There are more supernatural elements that come into play and that begin to affect the characters. But they don't know. They don't know that it's supernatural. They don't know what is going on. And they try to adapt to it psychologically because they have no expectation of any of these things happening to them. Unlike the characters in Knock Knock, there was always a sense that people knew the local legends. They had learned these stories as children. They had some idea of why things were happening the way they were happening. Even if it was crazy, even if it was frightening, they had some idea of where it came from, but not so in The Worst Is Yet to Come, because I wanted all of these people to come from outside to this place and then cross paths with one another, and then their mysteries would be revealed. Their sort of complex and mysterious narratives would be revealed. I wanted very much to challenge the ideas that we form about the characters based on our own prejudices, our own beliefs, our own what we want them to be. You know, I wanted every person to have a little surprise in them, so that you can't entirely figure them out. You can't entirely predict what's going to happen because you don't know their whole mysterious background, which I think is true of life. You know, we encounter one another. We make a lot of assumptions about one another based on a few things that we say and how we look and how we dress and what music we listen to and all sorts of things that are not superficial, but they don't get to the heart of what our background story is.
Well, I was really struck, or very early on. I mean, there's a lot of things I recognize in the kind of the main character, the Davises. Was a quick timeout. Was Kim Davis? Was that a specific call out to the infamous Kentucky clerk?
I knew what I was doing. Let's just put it that way.
um, but the Davis, we moved to rural Ohio from Toronto, so we had that kind of going from very liberal, very diverse urban setting to very rural, very conservative, not as diverse. And so there's this great little chapter very early on where it just describes the family in the wake of the 2016 elections, and that sense of mistrust and that sense of like what is happening and like who are we, and that like sense of identity. And it was very small. It's just a small kind of little bit. It was almost sort of how we're introduced to them. But it was so recognizable. It was, it's something that we're still kind of, it changed the way that neighbors looked at each other, like we sort of scanned bumper stickers. And if you see a red hat from like 100 yards away, you're like, that was a very, powerful. It definitely sets this, this in this time period in which we find ourselves. But ultimately, this was not a Trump horror story,
No, but I wanted that to be, I couldn't set it in that time without making without providing some kind of understanding of where these people were coming from and how they viewed themselves. It's more about how the Davises see themselves, because they were sort of gliding along, and you find out why as the story goes on. You find out why they were gliding along and why they made assumptions and why they lose touch with certain things and try to hold on to other things. But I have a lot of friends who have had that experience too, in the attempt at getting a really good education for their kids, or getting more space, or getting a safer place for their kid. There are all sorts of reasons or excuses or whatever, you know, aside from necessity. I mean, we all have to move sometimes. We all have to go to different places sometimes. And what you encounter there can be really, it can be pleasant until you dig down a little bit. I mean, the Davises had that experience of sort of waking up to the feeling that was being projected at them by their neighbors, and sort of looking around and going, why didn't we notice all of those American flags before? Where there's one in every window. Why were we so, well, we find out why they were unaware and why they made themselves unaware and what the urgency was. So I think that that's not uncommon an experience, especially now. And it could have been that election, or it could have been another election. It could have been Bush. But carrying the history of the town forward, I wanted to bring it up to date. I wanted to bring it right up to the moment. I wanted these girls who meet one another in middle school to have the background, the knowledge of Me Too. I wanted the Davises to have experienced the fallout after that election and what it meant for them and their community and their neighbors.
What was it like having to get back into the horror-laden world of being in middle school?
Oh God.
Well, because that's what struck me, right? Like, I think at first I thought, oh, high school, so many stories are set in high school and whatnot. But then as I sort of did the math, like, oh, no, this is 8th grade, this is middle school. Like, these are young kids. School.
Yeah, I did have at least one of the experiences of the girls encountering this guy in school. I did have, and I based a lot of the panic. There's like a panic surge of adrenaline. There's survival mode that takes you over, that I wanted to get back in touch with. Well, I didn't want to, but I had to get back in touch with to understand their mentality about this person and why they felt the way that they did about him, why they felt that this was about their survival at a certain point. So it's horrible. Middle school is horrible. It's horrible. And, I have nieces and nephews and friends who are the children of friends, and I see them go through it. And, I ache for them. I feel so. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. And, I just want to encourage them to press on and get through it. Their lives are not going to end up like any of the lives in this, dark fantasy horror novel. Okay. There's nothing in there that's going to happen to them. But just having the courage to just say, okay, I don't have full control over my life right now, but I will. I will have more control over my life at some time, and to get through that. I know it's hard, and looking back at it was hard.
Well, and you have one of the things you juxtapose really interestingly is you have one child who's coming from a place of privilege. She's got a wealthy family, that kind of the artist, graphic designer mom, and the working dad, and then the other one is literally living in a trailer park. She's her mom is a pet groomer, and her not even stepdad, but just sort of dude living with them is the world's like worst guitar repairman.
That's a good way to put it.
But like I was like, oh, I know this. I've been in these households, but you got that sense of having to, she had to grow up so much faster, right? Like these characters seemed older, largely because one is having to be the adult, which you see far too often in kind of homes like that. And then that juxtaposed with the more privileged girl, like trying to kind of catch up, and again, which is very common, I find,
against the boundaries that have been set by very loving parents who want to keep her safe, who want to keep her from danger. They want to keep her from the things that might ruin her life. And she's at an age now where she's fighting against that. And this other girl comes along, and this girl seems like sort of an answer, sort of a way for her to become a little more mature, a little more grown up, to kind of take charge a little more of her own life.
We have a comment in the comments over here. Someone saying, "Remember when parents and teachers told us these were the best days of our lives?" I don't think any of my maybe I just had much more realistic, honest teachers, but I think everyone sort of acknowledged that middle school was this sort of hellscape gauntlet.
I had a mentor in 8th grade. My English teacher, she was a wonderful person, and she really took me under her wing. She told me I was a writer. She gave me extra books to read and extra assignments that were, had to do with fiction writing. And she was just really great. She was one of those great teachers who recognizes that someone has a talent, but they're going nowhere with it because where they are, the circumstances are not fueling that creativity. Okay. And without getting over involved or interfering in my personal life or my family life, she really helped me. She helped me tremendously. So I've never forgotten that. I really appreciated that. But she didn't pretend either. She was, she understood that a lot of it could be hell, that it could just be awful at times. I mean, there were some good things that happened. There were some interesting things that happened, but a lot of it was really hard. And she didn't lie about that. And I appreciated that. And she gave me things to read that helped me to think forward.
Well, I think there's many of us, especially those of us in the sort of the genre bench who, had those sort of moments, had those teachers, especially the ones putting books in our hands. Like that was definitely my situation, right? Like I was the nerdy kid hanging out in homeroom way past like time to go home, my in 7th grade, like, the social studies teacher, I probably had more conversation with him than with anyone my own age, because he was an adult who was willing to listen and recognize a certain amount of, precociousness, and had looking back on it now, a deep well of patience with my no doubt insufferable prepubescent self.
I marvel at teachers at that who work with students at that age. If they're good at it, it's a great thing. And I did encounter other teachers like that. Once I was in high school, I was in American history class. We had to write this essay, and then we had to get up in front of the class, and they had combined the two classes. So you're like facing 50 or 55 students all at once, right? And you have to get up on this little platform and, read your essay to everybody. And so I didn't go to class for like almost a week, And so the thing about it is the class, American history, was taught by the wrestling coach for the school. And he was just this little bulldog of a man, he was very, and everything. And I was walking down the hall one day, and there was nobody else around. I was on my way out. I was about to make a clean getaway, and he came walking the opposite direction, and he's facing me, and I'm like, oh shit, I cannot get out of here. He sees me. And he just, he walked like this, he was like this bulldog, and he comes walking right up to me. He gets right up to me, and he says, I know what you're doing. And I said, oh, what? And he goes, you've already written that essay, haven't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, you don't have to get up in front of the class and give that essay. You can hand it in to me written, and it's okay.
Wow.
It took so much pressure off of me, and I appreciated that so much that I went back to the class, the next day that the class ran, and I did get up and do the essay. I'm not saying I did it well, but I got up there and I did read my essay to the class because that guy was that understanding. I thought, you know, what else can I ask for, right? He gave me an out.
Well, and those type of teachers. I went to teaching school, and I did a semester doing sort of teaching in schools to kind of capstone it. And I came to see the teachers who could recognize what a student need and give it to them in a moment. Like that's magic. Like that's not something that could be taught.
Yeah.
That's arguably not even something that experience teaches. Like there's something that is innate, that ability to recognize and respond. It's why I am not teaching right now, which is that I recognize I had a very like rigid, like I was the type of person who's like, no, we're going to get into a fight because now this is about setting precedent and this is about principle. I'm like, I reckon elements that I see in my parenting cropping up from time to time. The number of times like I've just gotten into a fight with my toddler because in the back of my head I'm going, if I give in this one time, it's like surrendering to North Korea. Like this is like
Trump will take advantage of us from now on if I give in to this.
Right. Like right. if I let him like control what's happening in this situation, then he's gonna be shutting down the government every single time. By which I mean demanding cheese before supper.
Before supper.
Literally got into a 20-minute fight with my daughter last night because she wanted cheese before supper, and like it's like no. First it's about the cheese, but now
cheese?
It's about the
Was it really good?
Of course not. It's just because children like they are little devious primates, and it's all about power plays with them. Anyway, this is not Lehman rants about parenting time.
No, I am totally hearing this. I am totally hearing this with my friends on Facebook who have toddlers. Yeah. Yes.
The idea that like children like gain intelligence and like, we like help guide them towards no. A child like from birth is as clever and as devious as like any human. Like that raw, cold, naked intelligence is there behind their little like lizard eyes.
And the pursuit of cheese is high on their list. So beware.
Cheese and crackers. Yeah, beware. Seriously. I have hungry children. I feed them. I feed these children, but they are hungry. My daughter, we once took her to this local like sort of greasy spoon place, and she ate her meal, half of my wife's meal, and then as I'm going to check out to pay, she is like sobbing and pleading with the woman behind the counter, "Lady, I'm so hungry. Lady, please." I'm like, like the state
that makes you look so good.
The state is going to get called on me because like my ravenous like just mogwai of a child is screaming for food. So that's the horror I live with.
Are there extremely tall, large people in your family? Is there any chance she's going to grow to be like 6.5 feet tall? Is that why she's eating so much, or is it just a growth spurt? Yeah,
but she might be because she has always been tall. Like, but she doesn't match. She is like blue-eyed, red-haired, curly-haired. Like she is this strange Viking changeling that showed up in our family, and she has always been tall. So there's a good chance that she's going to be this weird bean sprout. But no, like I come from not a short family, but a fairly like average size folk. So we're curious to see what this bizarre cheese-loving Viking turns into. But it's interesting, right? I mean, there was a really fascinating moment in your book that really struck me. It was talking about parenting and talking about parenting expectations, and this idea of who you're raising and who you're bringing into your house. There's a book that I absolutely love by Andrew Solomon called Far from the Tree, and it's all about parenting and identity. And he does such an amazing job of like smashing like romantic expectations. One of his great lines is, the act of loving a child is the act of imagination, because you are inviting a stranger into your house when you have a child. Like it's not you. You haven't cloned yourself. Like we talk about like, oh, like it's a little bit of me and a little bit of my wife, and we're mixed. No.
This is actually a lot of what Knock Knock is about. The Knock Knock, not to cut you off, but
no, please.
I think you will enjoy it eventually when I know you've got a reading list, a stack of books this high, I'm sure. But if you ever get around to it, there's a woman in Knock Knock who had a very difficult relationship with her mother. And she had a lot of trouble coming to terms with when she had the option, the choice to have a child or not. She really had to think about it because she had such a difficult relationship with her mother. And then she came to terms and she said to herself, you know, I'm not my mother. I am not my mother. I am not going to raise a child the way she raised me. It's going to be okay. And so she went ahead and she made the commitment and she had a child. And the child was exactly like her mother.
Well, I mean,
and I've seen this happen too. I mean, I've seen this happen where somebody just, they have a child and you think, oh, well, this child will be informed by me. They will have my characteristics and then we'll talk and they'll grow and they will move beyond where I'm able to be. And, you know, I've had friends just go, I just can't believe that I'm still having these arguments, but now I'm having them with my child.
Well, someone once pointed out, you know, that happens in a lot of ways because of overcorrection, right? Like if you have a really strict parent, then you're like, I will never be strict and I will let my child like do what they want and they will be able to stay up late. And then the child grows up and like, I have no boundaries. Like when I have a child, I'm going to set boundaries and there will be a bedtime. And like, there's all these weird course corrections that take place.
I have a sister and a brother-in-law exactly like that. They both came from very complex, you know, households where they felt like they didn't have enough structure. And they felt that a lot of their challenges in life had come from the fact that they didn't have enough direction and they didn't have enough structure. So they just went wild with the structure and they just really shaped their children's lives. And their children ended up having a lot of the same problems that our parents had. They turned up again, even though they had worked so hard to make this family different. And I think that's what you're saying, that they overcompensated. They went too far and children, you know, they pushed against that to find out what they could do.
Well, and kids want to have their own identity, right? Like, again, I could do an entire show just about this book, but there's another amazing quote, which like is like an ice dagger in my heart. That I keep with me because I think it gives good perspective, which is we are also proud of how different we are from our parents and then infinitely sad when our children don't resemble us. And I think like, you know, we all of us want to be an individual and be our own person. And then the second you become a parent, there's this expectation, whether it's biological or social, that you are like crafting this homunculus, this, you know, this little creature that you're going to shove full of your values and your thoughts and like your fandoms. If you're me and you're like, no, you've got to love Star Wars and you've got to be willing to play board games, you know, like,
no, you want to go to the Lovecraft Festival with me? Come on.
That's right. Well, you know, a great challenge that we've had is that my daughter loves pink. My daughter loves princesses. They're like, she didn't see any of that around here because my wife absolutely rejected all of that. Like my wife was super tomboy. Like she liked horses, but like there was, you know, was no makeup and no like jewelry. Like was, you know, that was just wasn't her scene. And yet our daughter loves all that. Now our daughter also loves like running around in the mud and like threatening her brother with swords and doing, you know, all those other fun actiony things. But, you know, it's a challenge, right? Like, do you say, no princesses, like that's, you know, not feminist. And that's, you know,
I don't like princesses. So you don't like princesses,
which is the absolute best way to make sure our daughter just like with her steely alien eyes only wears princess dresses 100% of the time. So, you know, you have to be like, oh, princesses. Okay. Yeah, you can do that. And hope it doesn't
I'm
become
so
a thing.
bored with princesses. Princesses are ages. Oh, whatever you want to do. Sure. try to be blasé about it.
Precisely. No, it's all these weird mind games you have to play because you don't want to necessarily like leap in and be like, all right, everything's gonna be princesses and we're doing the princess birthday party and we're doing like this, you know, but you also don't want to so fight against it that it becomes the forbidden fruit. So, as we go with you could be a princess, but you got to keep that sword in your hand. And, we talk about princesses have responsibilities as part of like monarchical representation and government, structures. They have to make sure they're, keeping in line with, constitutional monarchies and how that plays out. She really doesn't like it when princess time becomes history time, but, that's what she's going to get from dad. So,
yeah, I'm sure it will pay off. The history will pay off, especially if it's not a challenge to her desire to play the princess.
Well, and that's just it, right? Like there's this.
I just hope.
We sort of, we keep saying like, oh, who are they going to be? But they are who they are. Like it's just
right.
who are they going to be at 30? Like we already know who they are now. It's just going to be sort of like an extension and extrapolation from that. And so that's something to also keep in mind, right? Like, these creatures that we have in our house, they may be sort of larval, and children change and people change, but like they're still people. Like they're not like prototype humans. They are still people. And seeing a child as a human, or in my case, seeing them as a strange alien that I have to like act like a ambassador for, is fascinating. And so when you see children written in stories, or even prepubescent children, it's fascinating to see, and fascinating to see how that dynamic plays out, and especially in a story like this.
How serious their interests are going to be in the future. I mean, how deep is it? And that's what you're saying is true. You don't want to stop that. You don't want to block that, because it might turn out to be the very thing that they do. I mean, not necessarily being a princess, but something related to that. I mean, something creatively related to it. My nephew took a ride on a fire truck when he was 5 years old, and he said, "Oh, I want to be a firefighter." And people said, "Oh, that's so cute, that's so sweet." And he would draw pictures of firefighters and in school and everything, and everybody said, "That's so sweet, he's so cute." And now he's a grown-up man, and he's a firefighter in Washington State, and he goes and he fights wildfires, and and he loves it. It's his life. It's what he wanted to do, and he knew it when he was 5. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't always turn out that way, but you don't know.
Well, and that's what I really enjoyed in The Worst Is Yet to Come, where you see these very fights happening with the parents, right? This girl meets a new girl, and like, oh, is this going to be like just a phase? Like, are they just going to be friends for a little while, then fall apart, as friendships tend to do? Or is this like a more serious friendship? And like, they tie it back to her rescuing cats. It's very interesting to see the very kind of conversations that we have as parents, right? Where we're like,
there's a pattern to it. There's a pattern to what Tasha is doing. Yeah. She's, it's not just random. She didn't just randomly adopt a stray cat. She didn't just randomly insist upon, decorating her bedroom the way that she did. It's all part of a bigger pattern. And then, you see how that plays out and why, what started everything. So.
I definitely appreciated that. Let's see. I have a question from Thomas, who's saying, "What do you do if your daughter is born with tentacles and a bunch of extra eyeballs?" I mean, I guess you would have to have a very long, awkward conversation with the OBGYN or midwife. But other than that, you take the child home and hope for the best. Children already look like strange, weird creatures when they're first born anyway. So
they do. They are odd.
Who would even notice? Like when the placenta is fluffing out, like who's even going to notice? Like they technically, like, I mean, they've got tendrils when they're born, right? Like what is the umbilicus?
Before we started talking, I rewatched the John Hurt portion of Alien. And that's referred to in Knock Knock. The girls go to see a movie because it all takes place over many years, and when the movie comes out, they go and they see this, and it's described, and it's kind of related to some of the themes and fears things that they anticipate in the movie, but in the book. But yeah, I just watched it again, and I was like, it's like the first time. Every time I see it, it's like, what is that thing? I still love it. This is one of my favorite movies.
Oh, so good. Well, SP, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to end the note on John Hurt, as all good things should end.
Yes, on Earth.
This book comes out in about mid-February.
Yeah, February 22nd. It's published by Trepidatio, which is an imprint of Journal Stone, and it's called The Worst Is Yet to Come. And you can find it online if you Google it, or you can look at the Journal Stone website. And you can, if you purchase the paperback edition through the publisher, you get a bonus digital edition in your choice of Mobi, ebook, or Mobi, EPUB, or PDF. You can choose which one you want, and you can download that right away and read it. But then the paperback will come to you in February.
And where else can they find your work?
I have a website. If they Google SP Miskowski, they will find my blog and a list of all of the places where I've been published, and then they can follow me around. They can sign up to get regular updates, or they can sign up for my blog, and then they will know far more about me than they ever wanted to.
Fantastic. Well, SP, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you all so much for watching and joining along in the chat. If you would like to be part of these live conversations here at Ask Lovecraft After Dark, you can join the Facebook group, the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society. If you're wondering why, yes, you did. If you're wondering why I keep saying Ask Lovecraft, well, that's because 3 times a week you can find me impersonating horror writer H.P. Lovecraft at asklovecraft.com. You can also find out about dates for live shows. Right now, I'm going to be, let's see, what's coming up? At the end of February, I'm going to be, if you happen to be in rural Ohio, you can watch me impersonating Peter Sellers for a Chautauqua reading series. I still have to figure out what on earth I'm going to do about that. And then the very next day, the beginning of March, I'm going to be up near Cleveland for Cleveland Concoction. So if you're in the Cleveland area, you can come out and see me. I'm going to be doing some MC duties and some just general Lovecrafting about, so you can find me there. Otherwise, you can just follow me and see me screaming into the void on Twitter at Lehman Kessler. And I think that's going to do it. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for providing some interesting conversation. Someone talked about how true horror is ex-urban sprawl, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's just those weird, lifeless, like, communities sort of built around nothing. Like, there's not even like some like historic center. There's just like, there's a Walmart, and that's
right.
around this Walmart we shall build our land.
Right.
It's a little much. So we'll leave you with John Hurt and Exurban Scrawl. Once again, thank you so much, SP, for coming on the show. This has been an absolute delight, and we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you very much. I'd love it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week. Bye.